myself. My name is Barbara Cooper, and I'm the chair of the Fidaglo Democrats. Thanks for coming this evening. Really appreciate it. And this is our second in-person meeting after several years of COVID. So hopefully we'll be able to continue to do this. And we really enjoy having friends in the room. It's really delightful. So we do have a sign up in the back. So if you haven't signed up, please do. And that way, make sure you're on our mailing list so you'll get the notifications of the next meetings. We are very careful about not sending out a lot of emails, so you're not going to get a lot of solicitations or anything like that. We try to keep them down to the minimum. Also, Rita Sullivan, over there, made some lovely cookies for us. And Sarah Peterson made the coffee. There's coffee and hot water. So it's decaf, so you're safe. I'm going to ask everybody to turn off your cell phones. And unfortunately, we only have 2 mics, so we'll try to go around and give you the mic. If the mic doesn't work for you, what we'll do is have the speakers repeat the questions so we know what people are asking at the end. I'd like to read this. This is about who we are. We're an independent, this is the Fidaglo Democrats, are an independent democratic association with a focus on education. I want to remind people we are not a PAC. We cannot endorse candidates and we cannot contribute to their campaigns. We don't charge dues, but we pass the hat at some point in the meeting and ask for contributions. And I'd like to start the meeting tonight with an acknowledgement. We, the Fidaglo Democrats, acknowledge that we gather on indigenous land, the traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Samish and Swinomish people, and pay our respects to elders past and present. Our next meeting will be March 14th. Details to follow. If you're on our mailing list, you'll get a notification a couple of weeks before the meeting about who's coming. I'd also like to let you know that Zane Butler is in the back there, and he's recording the meeting. So if you walk in front of that camera, you're going to be recorded. And after the recording is out, Rita works with Rita Sullivan, and she sends it out on our YouTube channel. And you'll get an email telling you to just click on it, and there it goes. So that is that. And before we start the meeting, I'd like to ask, are there any elected officials, Democratic officials, including PCOs, that would like to introduce themselves? I know that Lee and Rita are, and Sarah. Okay. And I like to thank Don Ambrose, who edits the Skagit Democrats newsletter. That comes out weekly on Sundays, and it's absolutely great. So if you're interested, get on the Skagit Democrats website, and you get a lot of information about what's going on. And Carol and Rich Tamler, they edit the Whidbey Island newsletter monthly, and that's also really good. So I think that's it for me. What I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce everybody together, and then I'm going to let them talk more about themselves and what they're doing. Ryan Walters, that's Ryan over there, is a member of the Anacortes City Council. He is active in multiple areas. He's written several ordinances and has updated others. He helped get a grant for the community action to open an office in Anacortes. Dustin Johnson, right here, is the executive director of the Anacortes Family Center. He and the staff at the center have been very involved with the outreach program for Anacortes with the police department. Steve Monrad, over there, is the community paramedic with the Anacortes Fire Department outreach team. And he will be joined by a social worker and mental health worker as part of the alternative response team. And at the end there is Justin Easton, a part of the outreach team for the Skagit County North Star Project. This is a joint effort between Skagit County and Anacortes, Mount Vernon, Burlington, and Cedro-Woolley. And like I said, I'm going to let each of the speakers talk more about their work and how it relates to the issues of behavioral health. They can explain what is happening in our community and what they're doing. The focus of the meeting is the behavioral health, and so that's what we'll mostly be talking about. Not so much about the upcoming levy and the housing issue or the unhoused, although that might come up. But anyway, I'm going to turn this over to the speakers and hope that the mic works. All right, turn it on. Okay, that should do it. If it's not loud enough, I can turn it up.
Good evening. Yeah. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to be here tonight. I want to say I'm impressed with the Valentine's Day turnout. My wife is also impressed. Yeah, mine too. I do have 3 or 4 pages on the upcoming levy, housing issues, and the unhoused. So just get started there. You can edit that on the fly here. Let me provide you with some background on what the City of Anacortes and the City Council has been doing in the area of human services generally. It was back in 2016 that some of us started to become more aware of the challenges that people faced being full participants in our community, whether that was healthcare workers or restaurant workers or even city employees. Their ability to find housing obviously was a challenge, but especially with the rising cost of housing was all the other costs that come along with that, and people's ability, first of all, to fund their housing first, meant that they needed to dig deeper to fund some of their other needs. So we created in 2016 the Housing Affordability and Community Services Committee, and that's the principal city council committee that is working on these issues for the city of Anacortes. It was now Senator Liz Lovett's idea. I was Mayor Pro Tem, created the committee and appointed a couple people to it, and that committee got to work creating, first of all, a housing affordability strategic plan, which was adopted by the city in 2018. It wasn't very detailed, but it did contain a lot of the things that we're implementing now. And I gave a presentation to your group several weeks ago on all of the housing measures that we have been implementing. In 2019, we put the affordable housing sales tax on the ballot. You're welcome. And thank you to voters for approving it in the early months of 2020. That's currently funding 3 big projects. That's specifically housing, but it makes a big difference to people's ability. First of all, if you can't get housing, are you going to be able to figure out the other services that you need in order to participate in our community and be full members of our community? Then in 2020, it really started to become very apparent to us that we had some much larger problems in Anacortes with the provision of human services than we had in the past. I joined the Housing Affordability and Community Services Committee in 2020 along with newly elected Christine Cleland McGrath and Carolyn Moulton, who I believe had already been on the committee. And at the end of 2020, as we went through the budget process for 2021, I drafted a rider for the 2021 budget that instructed our committee to examine the unmet human services needs in Anacortes. And so we spent almost a year doing that work, basically all of 2021, while some of us were busy with some other things as well. Doing the work of interviewing service providers, interviewing community members, interviewing homeless people, interviewing others that had struggled with adult daycare or other issues and finding the services that they need. We also approved for funding in 2021 the program that ultimately became the Family Center's participation with APD, with our police department. And we then reported on unmet needs in Anacortes, human services needs, in January 2022. And you can find that report on the City Council meeting website. You can watch the presentation that we gave January 10th, 2022. But in summary, we identified 3 big unmet needs. First is housing affordability and availability. Everybody's on board with that one. We've been talking about that for quite a number of years, and we are continuing work on that, but we'd already taken some big steps on that. The second is behavioral health care. Behavioral health being generally mental health and substance abuse. We identified a lack of providers generally, a lack of our own access to DCRs, the designated crisis responders, who are able to detain people who need to be detained for their own health or safety or because they are a threat to others as a result of a mental illness or as a result of a substance abuse problem. We identified that as our number 2 concern among unmet human services needs, and it's not an area where the city provides service. We don't operate any mental health facilities, we don't operate any substance abuse facilities. We are not given state Medicare or Medicaid funding. We do not receive, we are not the conduit for pass-through of any of those funds. It's simply not the city's job to do that, but it is the city's job, in my view, to be aware of what these problems are and to advocate for solutions. And then the third piece was communication and coordination, information sharing between providers of services, information sharing between providers and clients. There just definitely seems to still be, because our social services infrastructure is so fragmented in the United States generally, there's a greater need for coordination and communication between those services that you might need otherwise. And we see that as a weakness here. Also, I believe it was 2021 that we created our community paramedic position in the fire department, and Steve will tell you more about that.
You're doing a great job.
We're giving the 10,000 foot view. Towards the end of 2021, we found a grant for a housing action plan, which we developed last year. We got a consultant and spent most of 2022 working through that. We adopted it just a month or so ago. But at the end of 2022, at the end of last year, I made several proposals for amendments to the 2023 budget. And one of those was funding Skagit Community Action Agency to open a permanent office here to provide another source of support for people that need their assistance in Anacortes. I also proposed that we put a levy lid lift on your April ballot to support our police and fire staffing. We have certainly encourage you to vote for that. We have critical deficiencies in our staffing for both our police and our fire being firefighters and all of our EMS response. We simply don't have enough of either of them to respond to the 911 calls, not exclusively the number of 911 calls that we get, but just any particular 911 calls, because you can't respond with one person, you can't respond with 2 people. If you have, well, Steve can tell you better than I can, but if you have a real critical medical emergency, we're hoping that we have more than 2 people on scene to deal with that. And there are some times of the day when we have only 2 police on duty for the city of Anacortes. So if we pass that levy, we can fully fund police and fire, which is something that we've been working on for 10 years. If we don't pass that levy, there are really going to be hard choices to be made in how we do other things. And behavioral health, human services, housing is probably one of those things, even though we don't really spend very much money on it. It's one of the things that people look at immediately when you look at how to cut budgets. I feel like we are getting a tremendous bang for our buck in all of the money that we are spending on human services and housing related issues, especially when you look at the total amount of it and how it's really not very much compared to the city budget. Also this year, because your utility bills are a large component of your housing expense, and because the city has raised your utility bills in a substantial way in the last 10 years, we are looking at a program that would help mitigate that cost of your utility bill, that element of your housing expense. So we're working on enhancing our low-income utility bill discount program. We have a program now. It gives you 20% off your utility bill if you meet income thresholds that were adopted in 1984. Our new program will automatically enroll households that are enrolled in the low-income property tax exemption program. It'll automatically enroll and offer the discount to programs like the Family Center, which is currently not eligible to receive the discount, and to organizations like the Housing Authority, which houses a lot of people in Anacortes who are poor, but is not eligible to receive the low-income utility bill discount program. And we're looking at increasing the discount so that it will be more than 20% and provide more assistance to people. Households that are less than whatever percent we settle on of the area median income would be eligible to apply, submit your tax return or whatever, and you'd be able to verify your income, and then you could get that discount as well. So that's another thing that we're looking at for this year that I think is going to be really important to provision of services for a lot of people. Most importantly, the message I want to leave you with before we turn it over to the other people who are actually doing the work is that this matters a lot to the city of Anacortes. Human services, behavioral health care especially, matters a lot to the functioning of our community. It matters a lot to what our police and firefighters spend a lot of their time doing. It matters a lot to the quality of life here in Anacortes. It matters a lot to our businesses in Anacortes and their ability to keep their doors open and welcome both our residents and our tourists. So we need to be very, I would say, aggressive in how we identify these problems, fund the solutions, figure out what the right solutions are, and make a real effort in this space. I laid out this history here because prior to 2016, the city was doing very little in this space. And now we are really picking up the pace, but there's so much more to do. So I'll stop there and turn it over to others. Dustin, you next.
Sure.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks for that overview, Ryan. I appreciate it. And I am very grateful for the city's support. So there are a few things I wanted to touch on early. The first is I want to read a quote from a Skagit Valley Herald article, and I won't tell you the year, but I'll tell you it was during a time when we were seeing a huge shedding in our community of mental health beds. And this was the prediction, and then I'll tell you the year. More people with untreated mental illness will end up on our streets, in emergency rooms, and in jails. These are the worst places for people struggling with mental illness to be. For taxpayers footing the bill, there will be more expensive places. It'll open up our community to more potential tragedies, such as the 2008 Isaac Zamora killing, and our psychiatric and treatment beds will be completely full. So, any guess what year this prediction took place? 2010. So, it is resounding to me that in 2010 we saw this coming. And what was happening at this point, and one of the reasons why I think this problem is so difficult, is that in our community we lost Northern State Hospital, and that was 400 beds. At Skagit Valley Hospital there are about 4 rotating beds to replace those 400. And that, is kind of a very brief synopsis of why this problem has gotten so much worse, and why it's gotten worse so much faster. So my day job is at the Family Center, and hopefully everybody knows what the Family Center is, but I'll kind of just get to what we've been working on most recently. So quick brief, the Family Center is a shelter for women, kids, and families, and we also provide affordable housing for low-income families and individuals in our community. But a few years ago, we realized that our community problem with homelessness and the issue of, in particular, long-term homelessness that has a big intersection with mental health and chemical dependency was really converging. And so with the city's support, we added a community outreach manager who is actually a former client and graduate of the Family Center, Nina Lunston. She's done a great job. One of the things that she does is to coordinate efforts with social service providers, AFC, Community Actions, Opiate Outreach Team, in addition to APD, AFD, and folks from the city, and any other community health partners that want to participate. And we do outreach into the community at least once a week. to try to deliver services to folks that are in need. The reason that this is so difficult is that for folks that are in multi-year homelessness and mental illness, it is really, really difficult to trust institutions. It is really difficult to trust police and any kind of emergency responder. And the only way to kind of recover from that institutional bias is with relationship. And so Nina is phenomenal. She speaks the language of addiction, so she can understand what folks are going through, but she can also speak the language of recovery and offer hope and hopefully some light to folks that are sometimes in a really dark place. I'm an incurable optimist, so I think there are things that can be done. Ryan touched on a few of those things. We're working on a few of them, so I'll let Steve touch on a program that he is largely responsible for. He was the grant writer for it. Super big kudos for our community to Steve and Bill for their efforts to do this. But essentially, we are expanding our community outreach to add a community navigator. So it is a young lady who also comes from a life of addiction and is also sober. She's had a remarkable life experience, and she is a navigator. So she works one-on-one with individuals right now 20 hours a week. She is housed at the Family Center as an agreement between AFD and AFC. And we have also added one of the counselors in substance use dependency professional who is certified and has worked with the Family Center for a long time, named Jennifer Paddock. So she can do assessments and screenings. She can call beds to get folks into long-term treatment. And all of these things, I think, are going to really benefit our community. And she can also just do ongoing treatment with folks just to start their relationship with counseling and substance use SUDP services, whether that's treatment or screening or just some general support. I've done a lot of community meetings recently, and there's a few things that I've heard a lot of. So number one is, why is there this issue with people that are in imminent mental health crisis, and why aren't we doing more? So Ryan touched on this, but in our community there is one provider that provides designated crisis responders to our community. That's Compass Health. We do not have any providers that are DCRs that live or work in our community. More often than not, they are coming from Marble Mount or Concrete or way upriver. So we are often faced with a situation where it's like, ma'am, I know that you're about to jump, but please wait, someone will be here in 45 minutes to assess you and get you care. And that is hyperbole, but it is also reality. And it is something that really can be addressed. How do you address that? That is a state and also a county issue. It is also an insurance issue. So if you have relationships with the Associated Care organizations or the BHOs, the behavioral health organizations that fund these county programs, that's who pays for these programs, and they hold a lot of sway. So that's one place you can start. Another thing that I've heard a lot of is there seems to be a lot more needles on our streets and in our parks. One program that went away just before COVID is our needle exchange program. It wasn't a really widely seen program, and that was by design, but it is a program that by and large works to get people safe and safer needles and gets needles off the streets. And so that program would absolutely come back any day. We need a space for it. It's a needle exchange van. They need to be in an industry place where people can check in and not feel like they'll be seen by the public at large. We really need a big mobile crisis outreach response effort that is more adapted to areas in our geographic regions. So right now, if we call a designated crisis responder or the mobile crisis outreach team, also a program of Compass Health, more often than not, all of those providers. One, we don't have providers right now because they don't have a prescriber, so they can't do the outreach. But when they were responding, sometimes it's from Everett, sometimes it's from Bellingham, and as the name entails, it's supposed to be a crisis response, and when someone's coming from Everett, that's really hard to do. That also would take a state response and a county level advocacy effort. The last thing I'll mention is a mental health or detox facility on island. And that really would do a lot of great things for us. Right now, if a patient goes to Island Hospital's ER, well, we have great services at Island Health, there's not an inpatient psychiatrics section of Island Health. So that patient automatically gets transferred to either North Sound or to Skagit Valley Hospital. And more often than not, they are discharged as fast as they come in, and so you can talk to the paramedics' experience with this, because there's no beds. And so if we had a response system that was on island, I think it would do a lot of great things. If you look at our chronic homeless population that is local, there are usually about 7 to 9. If you look at our hospital district, which now includes Orcas Island, there's usually about 4 or 5 out there. And our state and federal law says that these beds need to be capped at about 16. So if you do the math, we're kind of right at that threshold. So that would require advocacy at all levels. The city would need to approve it, the hospital might be a funding mechanism at some point, the state would definitely need to fund it, or the federal government in partnership with the state could fund that. So that's this kind of big intractable issue can be solved, but it would take a very coordinated response. And a quote I heard recently that I think applies well to this is, never look at a simplistic issue for a simplistic answer to a very complex problem. And there is no silver bullet for this particular issue. It would take kind of a quilt work of work that can start in this room, can start here tonight in our neighborhoods. And I think City Council is certainly pulling their weight by doing our alternative outreach team, but there's more that can be done. And if you have more questions about that, I'm happy to answer any after we're done. Thank you.
Do I get to go next? Kind of a hard act to follow, the two of these guys. I guess I'm Steve Monrad. I'm the community paramedic with the Anacortes Fire Department. I guess a little bit about me and then my program. I've been a paramedic firefighter with the fire department for 24 years. Lifelong Skagitonian. Spent my career here. Up until a year and a half ago, I was riding the ambulance as a 911 paramedic. And we began this program, Community Paramedic, back in July of 2001. And it's a different approach to responding to emergencies, and that you're responding to the non-emergencies to prevent the emergencies. In the fire service, we've done a great job of telling people to maintain smoke detectors and stop, drop, and roll, and all these things that we've done to prevent fires and other catastrophes. But we've done not a whole lot to prevent the medical emergencies or the other emergencies that we respond to. So in the past, if we had somebody who was a frequent utilizer of 911 or was frequently encountered in the emergency department or some other setting, we didn't really have a mechanism or a person or anyone who was able to or who was charged with assisting that person. So our only real recourse was to just keep answering their call. And when they called 911, we would go help them, take them to the hospital, whatever we needed to do. In some cases, that could be daily, that we would go see people daily, the same person. So models like the program that I've been working in are intended to help curb that response for the frequent caller who calls every day or calls often to figure out better ways to manage their needs rather than 911. A 911 response is expensive and also takes away resources for real emergencies, for non-emergencies. So we started this. We're the first fire department in the county to have a community paramedic program. When I designed the program, I visited several different departments. One was Bellingham. Bellingham Fire Department has a really robust program. Went south to Camino Island and Tulalip Bay and South County, which is a big area around Everett, Linwood area. But a lot of different programs I looked at. And the one thing that I learned right away is that when you see a community paramedic program, if you've seen one community paramedic program, you've seen one community paramedic program. Because community is the key word there, is because each community's needs are different. And you don't just open up to how you do this. My vision when we started this, it was always has been to have some sort of social worker working with me. And it was really exciting late last year when the Association of Washington Cities announced this grant for alternative response teams, and we wrote the grant and we were successful. And like Dustin mentioned, we're for 6-month pilot. We were adding Ashley, she's the resource navigator, and Jennifer, who's our SUD mental health professional. So now, rather than me go out and pull out my Swiss Army knife and try to figure out which tool I use to help somebody, I have actually tools with me. I have people that I can meet my friend and bring folks that right in. So I'm really excited to see where it goes. I heard an expression that I thought was very fitting, that we're designing the airplane while we fly it. Yeah, it's a good one. I think it really fits. Because we really don't, we're going to have to tweak and massage and try different things. But I felt really good even today. I felt like we made some good movement on a couple clients that we've been working with, and some plans with some folks that before now we haven't really been able to effectively help. So I'll stop yammering on and bring it on to Justin.
Yeah. My name is Jason Easton, and I'm the community outreach coordinator for North Star, and I'll explain what that is in a second, but I want to make a couple comments about what my fellow panelists have said. So I've had a chance to serve with all three of them in different fields and capacities throughout the years and relationships, and I'm nothing but impressed with the leadership of all three of them. But one of the things that comes through that's so consistent is that each one of them really talked about it's a community, right? It's a community challenge and it's a community solution. And I appreciate you guys, all three of you, for all the efforts over all these years that you put in. I'm the communications outreach coordinator for a newer program. It's called North Star. It is the joint efforts of the county and Anacortes, the cities of Anacortes, Burlington, Mount Vernon, and Cedar Woolley, to really closely align our resources and services to address the complex behavioral health issues and the challenging situations that we have in the community when it comes to homelessness. I know we're here today to talk primarily about behavioral health. When Barbara and I were talking about me being here, one of the things that was really important to me was to tell her, this is the first time I'm going to speak on behalf of North Star. And it's exciting. And I think kind of like in life, the first time you do something in a new job or a new position, you never forget. So I want to say thank you all for being here. I appreciate, I'm hoping most of you are smiling by the time I'm done finished. But I think to tell the story of North Star sometimes, and some of the challenges that we're all talking about, it becomes a lot about ordinances and stuff and dollar bills and buildings and repeat people that don't have names because we're careful about what we say about people that repeatedly happen. And I think sometimes it's easy to almost lose the personalization of what we're talking about. And I think one of the things at North Star that we've been talking about lately in this leadership team that I just named, just the mayors of the cities and the county commissioner Janicki, who's representing the commissioners, is that these are individual problems too, beyond being just community problems. And what Steve's got to do for that consistent responder today, or Dustin's team does with Nina, is different than what they're going to do with the person the next day. And I think sometimes because the problem seems daunting as a community and as governments, and as somebody who obviously is a citizen in this county and in this city, it's easier when it's complex to get overwhelmed. I mean, I think that's kind of normal in life. And I think what's exciting about everything that's been shared so far is we're actually talking about things that are being done today or planned to do soon. And when Dustin read that quote from 2010, at least this room, in this zip code, and in our region, there's actually efforts that are actually making a difference. There's a lot of things that we still have to do, but I think pausing and reflecting on that. One of the things that North Star's focused on right now, in our second phase, is our advisory committee. So Dustin, myself, and Steve, along with about 25 other people, serve on a committee together across a lot of different places in organizations that touch mental health, from law enforcement to housing to care providers at the table, from hospitals to nonprofits to faith-based organizations that are all helping in different ways, but sometimes we're not as effective because we're not as connected. And so one of the areas that Steve's been a part of the early conversations about is how do jurisdictions like AFD communicate with Compass better, or how do they communicate better with First Step, which is in Burlington and is a 90-day low barrier shelter. So you can do that kind of communication across organizations and get better quality care and not violate HIPAA, which was news to me as I've been learning about this, because what you're discussing is behavioral. It's about behavior and not my blood type or or things that have to do with my health conditions. And so finding ways to improve in that area, I think, is exciting. I've met with a couple of folks from different law enforcement agencies, just them alone, excited about that, because the issues with mental health and homelessness definitely don't stop at one way. They don't stop at either side of the bridge. They are flowing back and forth. There's a high-profile young person in our community who struggles with mental health, and when we hear about where she is, sometimes that's on this side, and sometimes it's on the other side of the county. And so finding ways and trying to approach this too, of being supportive of what Anacortes is working on, because there's a lot of, like Dustin said, I mean, and Ryan too as well, there's a ton of great things that are happening here, but we also need a larger view approach as well. And the way that dollars flow at times into these kinds of solutions flow through different governments or grants, like in Steve's case. Steve talked about a trade association, basically. I mean, it's the association of cities, but there was a grant available to them. As we saw through lots of other issues throughout COVID, the beginnings of COVID, funds flowed differently and had different requirements of where they could be spent and not. So with North Star, one of the concerns about going forward is, can we find better ways to be unified, still support each other's individual projects, but also tap resources that are it's a lot easier to say to state legislators. I'm looking at Rita because first time I met her was in a state legislator's office. It's a lot easier to approach the state legislatures or Congress and Congressman Larson when you're unified, when you're asking for things as a larger body as well. So there's a lot of hard work to be done in trying to build a robust approach to mental health. Some of the things that people struggle with that is not just funding, but it's actually having enough providers. I mean, Dustin touched on this. If providers are driving from, in a snowstorm, from that far away, the word imminent obviously stops being legitimate, and in the sense that it's not actually going to get done. So let's take a left turn here, and we'll wind up with a direction you may not have expected. So when Dustin read the article and mentioned how many beds, the 200 beds that went down to basically 4 revolving beds at Skagit, right? Is that what you said? It hits close to home for me, and so we'll put a little face on this for a minute. I believe that there's a lot of people who are struggling with mental health issues that are kind of what I would call functionally, like, you know what a functional alcoholic is? We can all relate to that. They're not doing a good job of managing their alcohol, but they're managing to go to work, right? Something like that. I had a period in my life where I was a functioning and then very deeply unfunctionally behavioral health patient who didn't have a doctor and didn't want to get out of bed and find one. I had a beautiful wife who I still have, which I'm very blessed with, and she's very kind, and 3 children at the time, and I had a very successful career and was doing well, but then I all of a sudden wasn't. And for almost 9 months, I couldn't get out of bed. And if it wasn't for the charity and love of some couple of families that gave financially to us, we could have very well been on the street with family pretty far away. But when I came to my absolute breaking point, I hit a dark and deep place where I didn't want to live, but I didn't want to die. But that doesn't work, right? You can't do both of those at the same time. And I happened to drive down to see my parents in Federal Way. And there happens to be a hospital 2 miles from there. And that hospital is named St. Francis. And they happen to have a dedicated mental health, behavioral health ward. And they happen to have had a bed come available 7 hours after I came into ER. And, you know, that was the beginning of a major turnaround in my life. And all these over 12 plus years later, much better being consistent, have a great inner circle, got an amazing psychiatrist, and rebuilt, you know, some broken things and broken relationships. And I'm here today because I really care about this issue, and then I was offered a chance to come out and talk to people about how to work together to work on it. But the stats that we're talking about, not just in our county or King County or in the state, me ending up in ER hours later with a bed open in that 20 bed, I think that 20 beds, that's like winning the Powerball. I mean, that's probably a little long odds, but you know, you follow what I mean. And behavioral health needs an improved system, but it also needs an improved system for the people we don't see. We need that system for the people that Steve sees on a regular basis. But we also need that behavioral health for people like Jason, like me, to keep me from not ending up being in a place that needs Steve. And I think we have the willpower to do this. This community is amazing, and as demonstrated to me over the 20 plus years that I've lived here, across the county and definitely here in Anacortes. But it will take, I think Ryan used the phrase, or I'll steal part of it from him, we have to be aggressive, and we have to be purposeful. And if you didn't say that, I'll give you credit for saying both of them. If you want credit for saying both. You take it? I'll take it. So, when it comes down to what we, the 4 of us, do, it's different. You know, I mean, I'm going around talking to groups. Steve's obviously doing paramedic stuff. Ryan's doing Ryan stuff and the council stuff. It's good, that's good stuff. And Dustin's doing tons of stuff. But without Barbara and you guys here tonight, we wouldn't have a chance to share, and then I know we're all open. I think the next step is to take questions, so thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, what we'll do is thank you all for coming. I know this is, and thank your spouses for letting you come. And I hope they will forgive us and not blame us, you know, like the Fidaglo Democrats. And we do have cookies, you can take some home. But, so what I'm going to do now is ask folks if they have questions to raise their hands, and I'll bring the mic over. Or, Candace have it. And that way we can hear the questions. So.
Hi, Mary Pick. Do we have access to DigWallet at all?
Yeah, for sure.
Can you talk about our utilization a little bit?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the question about Didwalich. So Didwalich is part of the Swinomish tribe. They are 95% non-tribal clients, and they do a lot of different things, but their primary service to us has been in medication-assisted treatment. So they provide to people addicted to opiates, either Suboxone, methadone, or a kind of variety of other medications that have been proven to be incredibly useful in getting people into safer use, or eventually stop using for a really great amount of time and with some really phenomenal results. So the simple answer is yes, we do connect with Didwalich. They provide, there's two primary ways. One is they drop off a bus right in front of the family center every day, usually at 5 a.m. to pick people up, take them to treatment, get them connected to counselors. They are a whole person treatment system model. So they have a dental clinic, they have a doctor that looks at all other maladies that might be occurring, in addition to treatment for men and families and groups and individual care. The second way is that AFC and Didwalich was, we were the first programs that connected to a program called Community Court, which is a diversion-based program that Judge Jennifer Housen started several years ago. And essentially it turns kind of petty municipal crimes into a program that, instead of going to jail or paying a really unreasonable fine that's probably never going to be paid, that person can instantly enroll in either treatment, and they often provide a provider on site during court, which happens every other Thursday sometimes, and depending on the level of need. And so they can enroll them immediately, or if they need housing or they need counseling or other support, the family center can enroll them in our services, and all of that happens in court in real time. So Jennifer, Judge Housen can say, you know, you can have this waived if you enroll right now in at this very second, and then we check in on a regular basis. Yeah.
Can I add something really quick about that? Both of those programs that Dustin referenced are like really revolutionary and really special that are here housed in our county. And it's exciting to meet their leadership and know, like Leon and like Judge Cowson, how excited they are about seeing those not just be, but grow. So we're thankful for that. And they are, because of that unique passion that they bring, we're thankful also to have them a part of North Stars on the advisory committee.
You guys both mentioned Upper Valley. You know, when you talk about Skagit County, it's Cedar Willie, Mount Vernon, Burlington, Anacortes. I have a cabin up between Rockport and Marble Mount. So county never recognizes anything about Lyman. You know, I've seen horse shows up there where I've been. There's been a place called Carefree Acres where my cabin is associated. I'm on the river. There's been 40, 50 homeless families in there. There's been, when they were cooking meth and all that, but recently that all got cleaned up between Seattle City Light, the county, and some individuals. But it's curious that that area has been disowned. Started about in the 70s when the logging went south. And Lyman went under, Hamilton went under, concrete lost its concrete plant. And then the Japanese logging thing, all the mills shut up there, couldn't compete with the Japanese on the lumber prices. And there's a huge houseless, homeless, and drugs up there. And they seem to be just pushed up there. Once you get on the other side of Lyman, particularly if you get on the other side of concrete, it is just kind of lost. So that exists in the county, but the county doesn't even recognize that they exist, etc. So how does that kind of figure? Because it's almost like there's two counties. There's eastern Skagit County, starting in Lima. And apparently Concord has the largest school district in the state, area-wise. So it's huge and there's no money. So again, it's just, there's 2 Skagit counties, actually 3, I would say. Anacortes, Mount Vernon, Cedar Woolley, Burlington. That's been that way since I was a kid here. And then there's the Upper Valley, but the Upper Valley lost all its economies. And all the, you can put internet up there till hell freezes over and you don't have the population and no professionals are going to move up there to raise their kids where the school district is crap and it's an hour to get anywhere. So anyhow, I just want to point out there is, I'd say 3 counties, Anacortes, Mount Vernon, Burlington, and then the Upper Valley. And the Upper Valley does kind of affect us in different ways. As you were pointing out, you said resources end up there that could be used here. Well, part of it, there's not much up there that you see that's institutionalized other than the food bank at Marbleman. So anyway, just a comment. Thank you.
I'm actually a product of that school district.
I can tell by the way you were talking.
You did good.
I know. I strung some words together. And, actually, I grew up in concrete. My dad's dad grew up in concrete. So I totally hear what you're saying about that area does feel like, and it always has been, that it does feel a bit isolated. However, I have noticed in recent years, community action is really become active up there. They have a very good resource center that's operating out of concrete now. So there are some resources that formerly were not there, and that was kind of a desert for that sort of service. So things have improved, but I hear what you're saying.
Can I, I wish this helped your point, but this is illustrative of your last point, kind of the 3-county approach. So, and this kind of is harping on the county a bit, but historically there is only one funding instrument that really helps human services, in particular homeless and also behavioral health, and that's called the document recording fee. It's the transaction fee you pay to the county. The state has statutorily mandated that to go into social services, and behavioral health being one of them. We have, in Anacortes, Fidaglo Island generates about 25% of the document recording fees. Historically, we get about 4 to 7% of that back. And Ryan's kind of taken charge with hacks on looking at the ability for Fidaglo Island to potentially reclaim that and facilitate that, because it's been an identified issue that we've worked with our commissioners for a long time on, to some success, but certainly not to the extent that we're getting the lion's share of what we put in back. So that kind of is illustrative of your bigger point.
I'd like to ask a question about what we've been reading about in a newspaper about community action and what's happening with that. If they're going to have services here once a week.
Yeah, let me answer that question, and then I've got to weigh in on the 3-county thing too. Yeah, community action is going to have I think it's about 40-hour-a-week office, so 5 days a week. The Housing Authority has offered them space, and the city has offered them $50,000 to help staff that office. They've already got people in Anacortes now. Their street outreach team, which is funded by statewide dollars, is operating in Anacortes, but having a home base, and also having a space where people can just wander in and seek service. My sense is that's going to be important. And you can also wander into the family center. You can also wander into the Salvation Army. There are other places, but everybody is also doing sort of their niche, and it will be useful, I think, for the community action niche to be something that people can access. That is a 1-year commitment that the city has made, so we'll examine how useful it is towards the end of this year as we go into the 2024 budget. I think a 1-year commitment might not be enough to really judge the efficacy of the program, but That might depend on your support for funding for these types of things. Also notably, Steve's program ends in 4.5 months. Because it was a 6-month grant. And I think we've already seen tremendous benefit from this. Not Steve.
Yeah.
Steve doesn't end, but the expansion of Steve's program. The expansion of Steve's program was only a 6-month grant. We've already seen the benefit of that, and we have got to find a way. Hopefully, another grant opportunity presents itself. If not, we've got to find a way to keep that going, and that'll be something we'll, hit very soon. On the 3-county thing, you are not the only one to make that observation. It's very common for especially elected officials in Anacortes to complain about the treatment of Anacortes on an equitable basis by funding providers who really fund the I-5 corridor and Cedar Woolley. It's only 20 minutes off the I-5 corridor. To some extent, East County has done a little bit better. They've had that community action office up there for quite some number of years. And the county made that happen. They offer that space to them in their East County Resource Center. The 3rd District Commissioner for a number of years was very aggressive in making sure that East County was not left out of things. On the other hand, it is a big area, and it's very expensive to serve. Anacortes has less of that problem. It's actually quite a bit of a smaller area. But there is a perception that Anacortes can take care of itself. It's a richer community, it can pay for these things. Well, richer a little bit, but not to some substantial extent compared to elsewhere. And it doesn't mean we're collecting more taxes and more revenue that can actually go to spend on some of these programs that we really need. So we need the support from the larger funders like the county or other providers over here as well. And we need to emphasize that whenever we're talking to people about how our dollars get distributed around the county.
Ryan, where is community action going to be physically housed?
I don't have the answer to that, but I believe it's going to be in the Olson building, which is in the Marine Supply block on Commercial Avenue.
My voice is kind of shy, but one of the things I didn't hear about is any specific relationship to the schools. And I look at schools, having taught for 37 years, as a way of educating educators on identifying and working with individual students, and also how they can bring students to you who need the help. Is anything like that going on?
Yeah, so the Family Center last year started, or 2 years ago now, started a program called Youth Connect. And it is a partnership with an MOU between the school district and the Family Center to provide mentorship to at-risk youth all throughout the ASD, from 6th grade all the way to 21 years of age. And we partner with folks in our community that have time and want to support at-risk youth. 1 in 3 students in our school district, I'd say that they don't have a trusted adult in their life. And this program connects people that have similar interests, whether that is language, common language like Spanish, or a occupational interest, or some of you might know Bill French. He's partnered with a kid that really likes welding and is interested in getting into welding. And so we are desperately in need of, in particular, male mentors right now, and have youth that are actively waiting. As a partnership with the school district, we go in and work with our counselors and teachers to make sure that we're connected with them through McKinney-Vento, which is a national obligation for basically rights of students that are homeless or in transition. And the Family Center oversees most of that.
How about Island Hospital? Can you speak to Island Hospital?
Yeah, Island Hospital also has a great partnership with the school district, and I believe Anacortes is the only district in our county that has dedicated social workers in each school, and that is through a partnership with the Anacortes School District and also Highland Hospitals Foundation. So it is something that this community supports through philanthropy primarily.
That's good. So just in the last week and a half, the leadership team, so the 4 mayors and the county commissioner, were asked from me about what you guys want my priorities to be as I start this brand new position. And schools was one of on the short list of what they want to do, what they want to reach out to. And so in addition to Anacortes, all the way to Concrete, which by the way, I have a meeting getting scheduled with the mayor of Concrete. We're going to be getting together with her soon. But obviously it's a big county and that's a small town. The other thing about schools that I think is really important is that when we participate in connecting to schools, we build better habits for people long term. So if someone's struggling with behavioral health and the schools like what Anacortes is doing with the social workers, and I'm sorry, with that whole situation about mental health, that there's a better chance, if you look at statistically, if you start having a habit of having someone you talk to when you're not doing well emotionally, you're going to you'll be much more likely to be doing that in your 40s than you are if you don't start until your 30s. So I think it's powerful.
Thank you. I'm Lee from Anacortes. Thank you very much for these fine presentations. I really appreciate all the details and all the articulation that you all. Just for my own understanding, if you don't mind, I'm sure you mentioned it, but hypothetically speaking, suppose I'm at the store and see somebody, a woman that's not behaving necessarily proper, if you will. Not necessarily violent, but rather she doesn't make sense. Where would you suggest we take that individual? If I say, well, can I assist you? Where can I take you? Typically the first thing would be to call 911 and ask for help. Or as Dustin mentioned, maybe take that individual to emergency services, Island Hospital. But I don't think, in my judgment, that's not the right thing to do. And would you care just to elaborate on this a little bit more? What do you think we should do with that individual?
Everybody might have a little different perspective, but some of it's going to be a judgment call, right? So anytime you think that someone is a danger to themselves or a danger to others, you should call 911. But maybe that's not the case in your hypothetical, and maybe it's not the grocery store. Maybe it's simply a homeless person wandering your neighborhood. That's not a 911 call in my judgment. It is somebody who needs help. So one option is the Street Navigator program that I talked about that Community Action has launched. They have a referral form on their website. And you can go to Skagit Community Action and find that form and fill it out, and they will search for that person. So maybe it's not even a person that gets that response immediately. Maybe it's not that level. Of course, if it is somebody that you feel comfortable approaching, maybe it's somebody that you know. You can get them in touch with any of these resource agencies that are here in Anacortes. And sometimes people have any number of problems that can be fixed by any number of the agencies. Maybe they have a housing problem. Maybe that's driving their stress and their mental health issue. Maybe they have a behavioral health problem driven by substance abuse. You don't know. In most hypotheticals, you're not going to know most of these situations. So there needs to be ways for people to connect people to that service, and community action is a good option. Anybody else want to weigh in?
Yeah, like Ryan said, in a setting of, in your hypothetical, if it is at the grocery store and you're not comfortable, 911 is the answer. That is what we're there for. So, call 911. We can come help the person.
So they will refer us to you?
They would bring in an ambulance or police car, depending on the situation. what that is, and you know, we'll assist them from there if we need to take them to the emergency room. Is it really the best? Ultimately, probably, we're not gonna fix their problem today. But if it means we get them to somewhere safe, you know, keep them safe and other people safe, that's what's important. But like Ryan kind of touched on too, if your hypothetical is that isn't the setting, that maybe it's your neighbor or your own home. I was hoping for an opportunity to bring this up, but I just recently went through a course that I found because I thought it looked interesting. It was a mental health peer navigator course. I don't know if you've heard of those, but I saw it advertised and I thought, well, you know, in my position that might be something that'll be useful, and I've been trying to take on extra, you know, training here and there that might help me with things. And I'm just finishing it, but it was really interesting. It was a 5-week course, and you can find information on it at mentalhealthmatterswa.com. And basically what it is it's sort of like a behavioral health awareness course. And it's not to teach you how to be a counselor or how to diagnose people's behavioral health issues, but it teaches you how to recognize that, hey, my friend Jason might be struggling, and how can I support you? And it teaches you some of the tools that you might be able to use to help support somebody that needs some help, and helps you learn some of the resources that you're able to, you know, potentially point these people to. It was so worth my time, and one of the great things about it was the broad spectrum of my fellow students. It was not a professional course. It was not intended for professionals, but there were people who were teachers and were nurses, and there were high school students and retired people, just from all across the board. And it was really interesting, all the different perspectives they brought, and the opportunity to learn from each other. It was totally free. In fact, I think they gave me a card for someplace or something. But it was definitely worth my time. I learned a lot, and then, like I said, just a neat opportunity to learn from other people. And there's a plug for that.
And you can also send them to the family center. So if the person's homeless, I'll leave some of my cards on the back, but Nina, as our outreach coordinator, she's having hip surgery right now, so give her a couple weeks. But she will do outreach to that person, or that you can send them to our office. I'm also the president of the senior center right now. I'm in big shoes. Barbara was the president when I joined the board. And so if it's a senior, the senior center is a great resource in our community as well. It just, as you guys said, it just kind of depends on what kind of needs the person has.
Was that a hip violation there?
No, that's a terrible joke.
Wow.
Wow.
So I've been reading a lot about different models about behavioral health, how it works with police services. And the CAHOOTS program in Eugene, for example, Bellingham's treatment of 911 calls, which apparently seem to be sent to other than police responders frequently, or the embedded social worker in Mount Vernon. So what are we thinking about in Anacortes in that regard?
Well, that's a good question. It was a couple of years ago that a number of community members came to the city to advocate for replacement of several police officers with an embedded social worker. The reason that was timely for them was because during the pandemic we had put a hiring freeze in place for all general funded general revenue employees because of the uncertainty around the pandemic. So we had some vacant positions, and towards the end of 2020 we decided, okay, we're going to do okay financially, so what we need to do is fill those positions. And so people came to us and said, well, don't fill them with police officers, fill them with social workers. And I said, you know, first of all, we can benefit from some assistance from social workers. On the other hand, we don't have enough police, full stop, simply to cover the shifts. So we can't do that. And what we did was we carved out $50,000 for the family center. Well, it wasn't the family center at the time. We carved out $50,000 to fund over and above social work. And that's why I say that we are getting such bang for our buck here, because that is still pretty small potatoes compared to what it costs for a single police officer. But that person isn't doing response in place of police, like they have had some success with in other places. That person is over and above. When that person goes to T Avenue to talk to homeless people down there, they're with APD officers as well. And I think our judgment is that that's the right approach. Clearly, they do not always need to be with APD officers, but when a 911 call comes in, we are sending either AFD or APD. And the 911 dispatchers are, helping tease out the details that are sufficient to figure that out. But if you've got somebody in a crisis that has generated a 911 call, we are sending one of those two agencies. And then we will follow up with Steve, if they need additional assistance, or we'll follow up with Nina, or some of the other resources that we have now. But for the crisis that generates the 911 call, we do think that it's appropriate to send AFD or APD resources. Now, if we had fully staffed APD and fully staffed AFD, I would still be sending them to 911 calls, because I can think of very few situations where we're getting calls and we want to send a social worker instead of those resources. But clearly we benefit from the resources that we have put in over and above for response. It's also not sufficient to respond only to calls. Like, we've got homeless people in Anacortes who don't generate 911 calls. We've got people who are about to become homeless that aren't generating 911 calls, and we need to devote resources to them as well.
Can I expand on one point that you made, Ryan? So a lot of people talk about embedded social workers, and I'll say this briefly, but people think about embedded social workers as a benefit to the external community, and when you look at those programs, that's actually not really true. It provides service to those communities, but by and large, those social workers don't have access to the resources like immediate housing or counselors or anything, so they're going to hand somebody a card. That card is going to be to probably, on Fidaglo Island, AFC, and the more people you put in between a person and that service, the less likely they are to get it. The benefit for embedded social workers is actually internal to the police department, and it's usually really good for police departments to have two issues. One, high use of force rates, and two, inappropriate experiences with people that are in domestic violence or acute mental health crisis. If you look at APD or AFD, we are dealing with highly trained officers that are incredibly compassionate with a very, very negligibly zero use of force. And so I would argue that it is not appropriate to necessarily, or it's not needed to put someone in that patrol room to change the course of the conversation into more appropriate behavioral health language, because that's already happening in our patrol room. And so I think that the community kind of got skewed on what an embedded social worker is and why it's needed and when it's needed.
To add, sorry, I have the mic. To add one more thing to that, I would staff us up a little bit on social workers, because we've seen the benefit of adding more to Steve's program, but we are going to very quickly hit that bottleneck that Dustin described of there's no place for the social worker to refer people to.
Right.
If there's no service at the end of the day, we still have a real problem, and so that has got to be as big a focus as anything else.
And back to the 911 call for the behavioral health response, with recent, within the last few years, the changes to policing through legislation, there's a lot of calls now that police used to respond to, they don't now, that we respond to, that quite frankly, we're not trained for. As EMTs and paramedics, we don't receive a whole lot of training in de-escalation. It's minimal compared to what police officers receive. They receive a lot of training in crisis response and crisis intervention. In fact, recently an organization that I'm part of with this role, through different co-responder programs throughout the state, we're coming up with a crisis intervention training for fire and EMS, because there isn't any right now.
Okay, so while you're looking for another question, I'm gonna ask these guys a question. So both Ryan and Dustin, you both referenced facilities, not like Ryan just talked about running out, and Dustin, you talked about what we don't have on the island. What is the eternal optimist? Would you call yourself an addicted optimist?
No, but close.
Okay. Can you help me understand where you see that, the best case scenario, how that works out? How does that change? Is that in the 98221, or is that county shared, or how do you see this?
Ideally, I think it would be on island, right? Like, it would be a Fidaglo Island response. In the way that I envision it happening, it would probably be a state and federal capital expenditure where they give the island hospital a lot of money to build and start operating a program like this, and then the hospital, through their taxing authority, provides an ongoing mechanism or something like that.
What's this? I'm lost.
For behavioral health facilities.
Generally, beds.
As a solution to the problem here at Anacortes. And so the other thing I would add to that is, and it goes back to your question about the 3 counties, it's not sufficient to provide these services in Mount Vernon or elsewhere, because a lot of people, or to provide the housing that people need in Mount Vernon or elsewhere, because people are part of this community. And if you make them move elsewhere, they are going to be, first of all, these are people that need their community, and they're not going to have one if they get moved to Bellingham or elsewhere. So it's really important that we be able to provide these services locally. And that's also the reason behind the unfortunate rule that these mental health facilities can only have 16 beds. It's a federal Medicaid rule. And I've actually reached out to Congressman Larson about lifting that number, because there is some middle ground between 400-bed institutions, there's only 3 of them in the state, and 16 beds, because these facilities are so hard to cite. So for instance, there is a 16-bed facility at the Northern State Hospital site that is closing because they're repurposing the Northern State Hospital site, so the county actually built a new one near United General. It's also 16 beds. So you have the opportunity to build a new facility, you build the same size. And the reason is because of that limit. Now they have more space on the site, so they can build another 16-bed facility next door, but don't connect the 2 of them.
That sounds efficient.
Yeah, so I mean, I would love to have one here. You know, there's another one being built or sited right now just outside of Stanwood. I don't know how this quite shook out, or if it's still in process, but the community opposed it. Mental health facilities are necessary facilities, whether they're inpatient or outpatient. We ought to have one in every community. And the fact that we don't have one in every community is why people are fearful of them. But we ought to have one here, and we ought to have more in Mount Vernon and elsewhere.
Yeah, if you can only build 16 units, then it definitely makes more sense to, and waiting for the feds to change the Medicaid laws could take a while. Could take a long while.
You could. So, right.
Sorry that the room is so cold. I'm not running out the door, I'm just getting cold. I'm trying to turn up the heat, so I don't know what the story is, so I apologize. I'll ask the library.
I have a big mouth, so I don't need the Okay, I'll be polite. I really appreciate the level of coordination and what's happening amongst the 4 of you and all that you represent, and your communication and what's happening. and I'm hearing a lot of needs that the community could respond to, but it's like, it feels like it's kind of all over the place. And so, I'm wondering if it's possible to have some kind of a coordinated, like, statement of priorities that we could lobby, like Rick Larson or our community, just whoever, like, do this, because I mean, I'm good at doing something if I know what to do.
I can send you the list that I used earlier to kind of mention. I can send that to you.
If it could come out to everybody, you know, through the downs, that sure might be, yeah, thank you.
That would be helpful.
Well, and as Dustin mentioned, there is no silver bullet solution, so there are a lot of different things that we need, but we can do a better job of communicating them to the public and making sure that people know, you know, here's an opportunity to come say, yes, I support that.
Right, I didn't bring my notepad, my pen, you
Right.
know,
And-
and a lot of information.
And I maintain a newsletter mailing list, which you can sign up for, and I try to send out alerts when there's opportunities for people to be involved that way.
Thank you.
I just have a question about what exists right now, which is the T Avenue homeless community. And if the city is allowing that to exist and will continue to allow it to exist, can the city put like a porta potty up there?
We're getting into a different area here. Okay.
Or some kind of service for the, if you're gonna allow people to live there, don't they need something more around them?
There is definitely a lot that could be said about that situation, and I'm happy to talk to you afterward. There is a porta potty there now.
Is there?
Yes, it's funded by Helping Hands, which is another organization. The needs there are involved.
Yeah.
The legal parameters of that situation is complex. I'm a former prosecutor, I can explain it to you, but not in the time remaining. But we can talk afterwards as well. I do want to say that from the perspective of our Housing Affordability Community Services Committee, our 3 council members who are closest to that issue, the situation on T Avenue is not okay with us, and we are pushing for changes to the city's response. Although we are not in charge of it.
I'd like to say that I think we're really lucky to have the 4 of you.
Yeah.
So impressed. Now, of course, that guy there, I've known him a long time. And Dustin, I've sort of followed your career. You're pretty amazing. But I'm just so flabbergasted that, and you're articulate. It's really nice.
Was she talking to you? I think she was talking. Are you talking to me too? I know Steve's. He went to Concord.
We'd like
Thank
to see
you.
more
That's-
of you.
Thank you. It's very kind. Thank you.
There's one more question, we're getting to 8:30, so I'll take one more question.
When you started talking, I immediately thought PR. I mean, what we need is PR because we hear so much negative. When anybody thinks homeless, they don't think of all the wonderful things happening at the Family Center. They think of T Avenue.
Sure.
And they think, why can't that city do anything about T Avenue? And those, whatever, they're living there. And so, you know, if these programs are so wonderful, but we need to get them written about somewhere, in newspaper or somewhere where people can become aware that they exist. Because I think most of the time people don't realize that even these programs are even existing Anacortes, they think you guys aren't doing anything about the problem. So I think PR, if that could be one of your main goals as you work together as a team, is getting the PR out there so people know that something is being done. Thank you.
Take a look at, you have one more day before the next paper comes out, but the paper did an article on the Family Center's 2022 results, and Brianna did a particularly good job with it. And then I'll put a plug in, the Family Center has an incredible volunteer, Kathy Inns, who keeps up our Facebook page and an e-newsletter with regular updates about what we're doing and what our needs are, and from Youth Connect all the way to outreach and shelters and housing in between. So please add us to your Facebook page, share those with your friends.
I think it's such an important reminder that there's the finding the sources like Dustin's talking about. The things that get posted there are good stories that you can tell your friends who are getting stirred up about tea. It doesn't mean that we're done as a community trying to, and Ryan's definitely part of the leadership of trying to make it better there, but it is better for people to have hope with the fact that, I've lived here long enough to know when Dustin didn't live here because there wasn't an AFC that he was working for. I mean, I've lived here long enough to know when there wasn't, Digualich, did I say it wrong? Digualich. I'm going there on Friday for a tour, so I better practice. But I mean, I've lived here long enough to know when that wasn't there, and I think it's so easy to get focused on it being worse or what you see in your neighborhood. And I'm not trying to downplay what it feels like to have someone walk through your neighborhood that makes you uncomfortable, or in the grocery store. But it's the part of that PR is the Facebooks and it is the great stories, but it's you telling those, retelling those stories. It's that, and it was that realization why this position didn't exist and now it does. It's why doing these events, and if you have groups that want to hear, I'll volunteer, all of you guys, who want to hear from any of us that we can help with, we've spoke in different places at different times and will with any group. So if there's anybody, if it's a home, if it's a group of people at someone's home, or somebody's club that they're involved, to be about people who just always focus on these topics. Just have to be people who live here, who might want to hear about something different. And, there is a lot of optimism on this table. There's also a lot of, we got a lot of work to do too. But we all have loved telling the stories about how things get better, because they have gotten better. And thanks to so many people with visionary leaders in our community. So, you are the PR too. So.
I just want to thank you all for coming. I think it's been very helpful, very enlightening, and I really do feel that we are moving along in these issues. Like you said, it's a complicated thing, and so I really appreciate all the different aspects of what's going on. And I really appreciate you taking the time, especially tonight. It's a special night, so you guys are very special for coming, and it's really appreciated.
Thank you.